Behind the walls of the Vatican are artifacts that change color, emit light, and react to human presence. Ancient relics capable of defying the laws of physics are hidden from the eyes of humanity. Why is the Church so afraid to reveal their existence? What will happen if the world learns the truth about living stones and glowing metals? Today, we will lift the veil of secrecy on one of the greatest mysteries in history: relics that change reality. If you are interested in the secrets that are hidden from humanity, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new investigations. What do you think? Could ancient civilizations have possessed technologies that surpassed modern ones? Or is it all just religious myths? Share your opinion in the comments. In 1972, a young priest named Antonio Rivero descended into the secret vaults beneath St. Peter's Basilica for the first time. What he saw that day turned his understanding of reality upside down and forced him to remain silent for nearly 40 years. Only shortly before his death, in 2009, did he decide to tell his nephew about an ancient relic that changed color right before his eyes. The silver cross, covered with centuries of patina, suddenly began to darken, as if absorbing the surrounding light, and then glowed from within with a warm golden radiance. Antonio swore that he had not consumed alcohol and was fully conscious when the metal seemed to come to life before his eyes. This case is not unique in the history of the Vatican, and similar testimonies have been carefully collected in secret archives for many centuries. The phenomenon of changing relics is known to a small circle of senior church hierarchs who pass on knowledge about them from generation to generation. According to internal documents, which some researchers have managed to access, there are at least 23 artifacts with inexplicable properties in the Vatican's vaults. These objects do not simply change their appearance. They seem to interact with people on a level that is inaccessible to modern science. Witnesses describe how the relics react to the emotional state of people nearby, changing shades depending on the mood of those present. One of the cardinals, who wished to remain anonymous, told a journalist how an ancient chalice turned coal black when a person with suicidal thoughts entered the room. The Vatican's official position on this issue has remained unchanged for decades. There are no anomalous artifacts in the vaults, and all eyewitness accounts can be explained by the play of light, fatigue, or religious ecstasy. However, information continues to leak out, and every year there is more and more evidence from former Vatican employees, library and museum workers. They talk about strict instructions prohibiting the photographing of certain objects, special rooms with enhanced security, and strange requirements for staff access. Why is the Church so afraid of publicity when it comes to nothing more than ancient religious objects? Perhaps the mystery is much deeper than it seems at first glance, and revealing the true nature of these relics could shake the foundations of the modern worldview. History knows many examples of the Church hiding inconvenient facts that could cause mass panic or undermine the authority of religious institutions. In the case of changing relics, the stakes are particularly high because we are talking about physical objects that demonstrate properties that science cannot explain. If the existence of such artifacts is officially recognized, fundamental ideas about matter, energy, and the nature of reality will have to be revised. Materialist scientists will find themselves at an impasse, confronted with a phenomenon that goes beyond the known laws of physics. Religious thinkers would receive irrefutable proof of the existence of supernatural forces, but this would raise uncomfortable questions about the origin and purpose of these forces. This is precisely why the Vatican prefers to remain silent and carefully controls any information that could leak outside the walls of the Holy See. The few researchers who have managed to gather reliable evidence about living relics face active opposition from church authorities. Their publications are ignored by the academic community, access to archives is denied under various pretexts, and sometimes it even comes to direct threats and intimidation. One journalist from Italy, who was trying to write a book about the phenomenon, received an official warning from Vatican lawyers about the inadmissibility of spreading false information that discredits the reputation of the Church. After that, her publisher refused to publish the manuscript, citing legal risks. Such cases create an atmosphere of fear and self-censorship around the topic, making serious scientific study of the phenomenon virtually impossible. But the more obstacles there are to the truth, the greater the public interest, and the more persistent the attempts to lift the veil of secrecy over one of the most mysterious pages in the history of the Vatican. The nature of the phenomenon of changing relics remains one of the greatest mysteries in human history, despite numerous attempts to find a rational explanation. Skeptical scientists suggest that these are thermochromic materials capable of changing color depending on the ambient temperature. Indeed, some metal alloys and minerals have similar properties, but this explanation does not stand up to scrutiny. Witnesses claim that the changes occur instantly, without any visible source of heat or cold, and the temperature in the storage rooms is kept stable throughout the year. Moreover, the relics do not simply change color. They display complex patterns of change, as if responding to invisible stimuli. An ancient silver chalice may turn dark blue in the presence of one person, and glow pink when another approaches. Particularly intriguing are cases where artifacts change not only color, but also physical form. Several witnesses from among the church ministers independently reported a relic resembling a metal rod that became shorter or longer without any mechanical influence. One of the monks who worked in the Vatican archives in the 1980s swore that he saw the surface of an ancient tablet covered with new symbols that had not been there an hour earlier. He made sketches before and after the transformation, but his records were confiscated by his superiors and classified. Physicists call such phenomena impossible from the point of view of the known laws of nature, because changing the shape of a solid body requires the application of considerable force or heating to the melting point of the material. The most common theory among believers links the phenomenon to the presence of divine energy or spiritual power contained in the relics of saints. According to this point of view, artifacts serve as conduits between the material and spiritual worlds, responding to the prayers, faith, and state of mind of the people nearby. Indeed, most of the recorded cases of transformation occurred during religious ceremonies, prayers, or in the presence of deeply religious people. Cardinal Mario Bergamini, who served in the Vatican from 1960 to 2005, wrote in his personal diary about how an ancient icon changed shades during an Easter service, as if responding to the collective prayers of those gathered. He described it as a visible manifestation of grace, the materialization of the invisible, spiritual dimension of reality. However, there is also a darker interpretation of the phenomenon, associated with ancient pagan cults and magical practices. Some researchers believe that some of the Vatican's relics are of pre-Christian origin and carry the energy of forgotten rituals. Medieval chronicles mention artifacts captured by the Crusaders in the Middle East that possessed strange properties long before they ended up in church vaults. Perhaps these are the remnants of technologies from lost civilizations, the principles of which have been lost over the centuries. This version explains why the Vatican so carefully conceals the existence of such objects. Acknowledging their reality would mean acknowledging that Christian tradition has absorbed elements of more ancient, pagan practices. Such a discovery could seriously undermine the doctrinal foundations of the Church and cause a schism among believers. Material scientists and chemists who have been shown photographs of some of the relics suggest that they contain substances unknown to science, or unusual crystal structures. Certain minerals are indeed capable of fluorescing under ultraviolet radiation or exhibiting pleochroism, i.e., a change in color depending on the angle of observation. However, none of the known materials can explain the entire range of observed effects, including spontaneous luminescence in complete darkness, reaction to people's emotional states, and physical deformation without external influence. What if ancient craftsmen possessed secrets of material processing that modern science is only beginning to rediscover? And isn't the Vatican's stubborn refusal to allow scientific research on the artifacts evidence that the Church knows something that others should not know? The luminescence of the artifacts is a separate aspect of the phenomenon that causes the most controversy among researchers and witnesses. It is not simply a reflection of light from a polished metal or stone surface, but an internal radiation emanating from deep within the material with no visible source of energy. Sister Teresa Montalvo, who worked in the Vatican Library in the 1990s, recalled how one night she discovered a faint, bluish glow coming through a crack under the door of a forbidden room. When the guards opened the room, they found an ancient reliquary inside, emitting a soft light sufficient for reading in complete darkness. The glow lasted about 20 minutes, then gradually faded, leaving the artifact in its normal state. There were no sources of electricity or chemicals in the room that could cause such a phenomenon, and the reliquary itself was cold to the touch. The intensity and color of the glow vary depending on the specific artifact and circumstances. Some relics emit a warm golden light reminiscent of a candle flame, while others glow with a cool silver or bluish glow similar to moonlight. There have been cases of red, green, and even purple glow, and according to church ministers, each color corresponds to a certain emotional or spiritual state of those present. A golden glow usually appears during prayers and religious ceremonies. Blue is associated with a state of deep meditation or contemplation. And red, according to records, appears in the presence of people experiencing strong emotions, such as anger, fear, or grief. This correlation between the color of the glow and the psycho-emotional state of the observers suggests the existence of an unknown mechanism of interaction between human consciousness and the physical matter of the artifact. Physicists familiar with the description of the phenomenon point to several possible explanations from the point of view of modern science. One hypothesis links the glow to radioactivity. Some minerals and metals contain isotopes that can emit faint light for centuries. However, it is impossible to verify this version without direct access to the artifacts and conducting radiometric measurements, which the Vatican categorically does not allow. Another explanation is based on the phenomenon of triboluminescence, when certain crystals glow when subjected to mechanical stress or friction. But witnesses claim that the glow occurs spontaneously, without any physical contact with the relics. A third theory suggests the presence of bioluminescent microorganisms or fungi that have colonized ancient objects. But this version does not explain the change in the color of the glow, depending on the people present. Of particular interest is the evidence that the glow of the relics intensifies in the presence of certain people and practically disappears in the presence of others. Father Giuseppe Carlo, who served as the keeper of secret artifacts for 15 years, told his colleagues about a priest in whose presence an ancient cross began to glow so brightly that it was necessary to cover one's eyes. At the same time, the same artifact remained dark when other people, including high-ranking cardinals, were nearby. This observation gave rise to the theory that relics react to some internal characteristic of a person, perhaps their level of spiritual development, purity of thought, or a special gift that cannot be objectively measured. The Vatican uses this phenomenon to select clergymen who are allowed to work with sacred objects. If the artifact does not react to the presence of a candidate, he is not allowed to continue serving in the secret vaults. The most mysterious cases are associated with the simultaneous glow of several relics stored in different rooms of the Vatican. Twice in the history of modern observations, in 1987 and 2003, guards and clergy independently reported that artifacts in 3 different repositories, located at a considerable distance from each other, began to glow at the same time. The glow lasted for about an hour, then stopped as synchronously as it had begun. No special events took place at these moments. No religious ceremonies were held, which makes the phenomenon even more inexplicable. Perhaps the relics are connected by invisible bonds, forming a single system that reacts to some global events or energy processes that are inaccessible to human perception. And if so, who or what created this system, and for what purpose? Access to the changing relics is strictly regulated by a system of initiations that exists in the Vatican parallel to the official church hierarchy. Not every cardinal or bishop is granted the right to know about the existence of these artifacts, let alone the possibility of direct contact with them. There is a closed group of clergymen united in a kind of secret order, whose members are bound by a vow of silence more strict than the usual monastic vows. These people undergo many years of training, including not only theological education, but also special spiritual practices designed to develop the ability to interact with the artifacts in a safe manner. According to some sources, candidates are subjected to psychological testing and checks reminiscent of the procedures for access to top-level state secrets. The initiation process is as shrouded in secrecy as the relics themselves, but some details have leaked out thanks to the testimony of former clergymen. Candidates must spend several months in seclusion, practicing meditation and prayer according to special techniques passed down orally from mentor to student. They are taught techniques for controlling their emotions and thoughts, developing the ability to concentrate for long periods of time, and a special state of consciousness described as inner silence. Only after successfully completing this training is the candidate taken to one of the secret repositories for their first contact with the artifact. This moment is considered critical. Either the relic accepts the person, demonstrating its properties, or it remains inert, which means rejection and the inability to continue serving in the secret order. There are known cases when even high-ranking church officials were rejected by artifacts, despite years of impeccable service. Those who have undergone initiation gain access to ancient texts and documents describing the history of the relics and the rules for handling them. These manuscripts are kept separately from the main Vatican archives in rooms with enhanced security, where even papal nuncios are not allowed to enter without special permission. The texts contain warnings about the possible dangers of mishandling the artifacts, descriptions of cases where contact with the relics led to physical or mental disorders in inadequately prepared people. One document, dating from the 16th century, mentions a priest who lost his sight after touching a glowing artifact without proper spiritual preparation. Another chronicle tells of a monk who fell into a state of catalepsy for 3 days after meditating in front of one of the relics, and after awakening, he could not remember anything that had happened. The rituals performed by consecrated cardinals with the participation of relics are a mixture of ancient prayer practices and actions reminiscent of magical ceremonies. Participants wear special vestments, different from the usual liturgical vestments, and use special objects of worship that are not used in everyday services. The ceremonies are held on specific days associated with the church calendar, but also take into account astronomical phenomena, such as the full moon, equinox, or solstice. One former Vatican minister described a ritual in which several cardinals formed a circle around a glowing artifact, reciting prayers in Latin, the text of which did not correspond to any known liturgical texts. The relic responded to their actions by intensifying its glow and changing color, creating the impression of a living being responding to their address. The purpose of these rituals remains a subject of speculation and conjecture. Officially, they are explained as a special form of prayer and veneration of holy objects. But some researchers believe that they are attempts to extract information or energy from the artifacts. There is a theory that relics serve as a kind of portal or receiver, connecting the material world with other dimensions of reality. Initiated cardinals are supposedly able to use these artifacts to obtain knowledge about future events, hidden information about the past, or answers to important questions that are inaccessible to ordinary means of cognition. This would explain why the Vatican guards its secrets so carefully. Possessing such a source of information gives it a huge advantage in political and spiritual affairs. But if this is true, does it not make the Church a hostage to ancient forces whose nature it is unable to fully understand and control? The first documented attempts to scientifically study Vatican relics date back to the mid-19th century, when the natural sciences were actively developing in Europe and rational thinking began to supplant the religious worldview. Several progressive clergymen, educated at universities, proposed applying the methods of experimental physics and chemistry to study artifacts that demonstrated unusual properties. The idea met with fierce resistance from the conservative part of the church hierarchy, which feared that a scientific approach could debunk miracles and undermine faith. Nevertheless, in 1863, Pope Pius IX authorized a limited study of one of the relics by a group of scientists under the strict supervision of church authorities. The experiment ended unexpectedly and mysteriously. The team consisted of 3 researchers, a physicist, a chemist, and a naturalist, all of whom were devout Catholics, which was considered a prerequisite for access to the relics. They were allowed to observe and measure an ancient metal disc, which, according to testimony, changed color in the presence of people praying. The scientists installed thermometers, barometers, and other instruments of the time to record any changes in the physical parameters of the environment. During the first 2 weeks, the artifact behaved completely normally, showing no abnormal properties, which made the researchers doubt the reliability of previous observations. However, in the 3rd week, during evening prayers, the disc suddenly began to change color, transitioning from a dull gray to a rich blue. Scientists recorded that the temperature of the artifact had not changed, and no chemicals capable of causing such an effect were detected in the air. When the physicist tried to touch the disc during the transformation with a special measuring rod, something inexplicable happened. A bright flash of light burst from the point of contact, accompanied by a sharp crack reminiscent of an electric discharge. The researcher recoiled, and all the measuring instruments in the room simultaneously malfunctioned. The thermometer cracked, the barometer needles froze in place, and the pocket watches of all 3 scientists stopped at the same moment, even though the mechanisms were not connected to each other. The physicist himself had a fever for several days, complained of headaches and sleep disturbances, and had strange dreams that he could not remember afterwards. After this incident, the church authorities immediately stopped the experiment and banned any further attempts at scientific research on the relics. The report on what happened was classified, and the scientists were ordered to remain silent under threat of excommunication from the church. The second documented study took place only in 1927, when Italian physicist Enrico Ferrari, a Catholic and a recognized expert in the field of electromagnetism, received permission to measure the electromagnetic field around one of the luminous relics. He used a newly invented cathode ray oscilloscope, hoping to record unusual electrical phenomena. The experiment was conducted in the presence of 2 cardinals and recorded by a notary. Ferrari set up the equipment 3 meters away from the artifact to avoid direct contact. When the relic began to glow during the evening service, the oscilloscope recorded a series of powerful electromagnetic pulses that did not correspond to any known natural or artificial sources. The frequency and amplitude of the signals changed chaotically, creating a complex pattern that, according to the scientist, resembled an encoded message or musical composition. However, after 20 minutes of observation, the oscilloscope began to malfunction. Distortions appeared on the screen, and then the device completely failed as a result of an internal short circuit. Ferrari discovered that the insulation on the wires had melted, even though the temperature in the room remained normal. Moreover, when he returned to the laboratory and tried to analyze the recorded data, he found that the photographic plates on which the oscillograms were recorded were completely exposed, as if they had been exposed to a powerful source of radiation. However, The Geiger counter did not show any increased radiation background in either the artifact or the damaged equipment. Ferrari wrote a detailed report on his observations, but the Vatican banned its publication, and the scientist himself received a stern warning not to share the results with his colleagues. Until the end of his life, he claimed that he had encountered a phenomenon beyond the scope of known physics and regretted that he could not continue his research due to the church ban. Mysterious breakdowns of scientific equipment during attempts to study Vatican relics became so frequent that some scientists began to talk about the curse of the artifacts, or the effect of active defense, as if the objects themselves resisted study. In the 1950s, when more sophisticated instruments for recording electromagnetic radiation and radiation appeared, the Vatican, under pressure from the scientific community, allowed another series of experiments to be conducted. A group of physicists from the University of Bologna brought modern equipment, including spectrometers, magnetometers, and the latest generation of Geiger counters. The researchers planned to conduct a comprehensive analysis of 3 relics that exhibited luminescence and color changes. However, even during the installation of the instruments, inexplicable malfunctions began to occur. Calibrated measuring devices showed chaotic readings, and electronic components overheated for no apparent reason. When the experiment finally began, the situation became even stranger. The spectrometer, designed to analyze the light emitted by the artifact, recorded spectral lines that did not correspond to any known chemical element. Physicists rechecked the calibration of the device several times, but the results remained unchanged. The relic emitted light with wavelengths that should not exist according to quantum theory. Moreover, the spectrum constantly changed, as if the artifact was generating radiation with variable characteristics in real time. An attempt to photograph this phenomenon also ended in failure. The photographic film was strangely damaged, with concentric circles and spiral patterns appearing on it that were unrelated to the object being photographed. The team leader, Professor Carlo Romero, later admitted to his colleagues that he had never encountered such technical problems in 30 years of scientific work. The climax came on the 3rd day of research, when scientists attempted to take a microscopic sample of material from the surface of one of the relics for chemical analysis. The procedure required a special tool with a diamond tip capable of making a barely noticeable scratch on the metal. At the moment of contact between the tool and the artifact, a powerful electromagnetic pulse was recorded by all instruments simultaneously. The pulse was so strong that it caused a temporary power outage throughout the building where the experiment was being conducted. When power was restored, it was discovered that most of the electronic equipment was irretrievably damaged. Microchips were burned out, fuses were melted, and some devices showed signs of internal combustion. The most surprising thing was that the diamond tip of the sampling tool was crushed, as if it had tried to scratch not metal, but a substance harder than diamond. After this incident, the Vatican finally banned any invasive methods of examining relics, allowing only remote observations without direct contact. However, even non-contact measurements continued to be accompanied by technical problems. In the 1970s, a Japanese group of researchers specializing in the study of anomalous phenomena brought equipment based on semiconductor detectors to the Vatican, which were considered more reliable than tube technology. The devices were placed 5 meters away from the artifacts and operated in automatic mode, recording data on magnetic tape. For a week, the equipment functioned normally, recording weak anomalies in the magnetic field around the relics. Then, without warning, all the magnetic tapes were demagnetized, even though they had not been exposed to external magnetic fields. The recorded information was irretrievably lost, while the tape recorders themselves continued to function properly. The most technologically advanced attempt at study was made in the early 2000s, when a group of physicists from CERN proposed using quantum sensors and ultra-sensitive particle detectors to analyze the radiation of the artifacts. The Vatican agreed to the experiment on condition of strict confidentiality of the results. The equipment, costing several million euros, was to operate continuously for a month, collecting data on any physical processes around the relics. The first 2 weeks passed without incident, with the sensors recording strange quantum fluctuations and anomalies in the behavior of elementary particles that did not fit into the standard model. However, in the 3rd week, all detectors simultaneously recorded a powerful emission of an unknown type of radiation, after which all the electronics failed. Expert analysis showed that the damage was consistent with the effects of a powerful electromagnetic pulse, comparable to the effects of a nearby nuclear explosion, although there had been no explosion. What kind of force is capable of generating such pulses? And why is it activated precisely during attempts at scientific analysis? Theories about spiritual forces and energy fields permeating relics gained new momentum in the 20th century, thanks to the work of scientists studying the borderline areas between physics and metaphysics. In the 1920s, Russian biophysicist Alexander Gurevich proposed the concept of mythogenetic rays, a special type of ultra-weak ultraviolet radiation emitted by living cells. Although his theory was met with skepticism by the academic community, it opened a discussion about the possibility of forms of energy that do not fit into the framework of classical physics. Some researchers drew a parallel between mythogenetic radiation and the luminescence of Vatican artifacts, suggesting that the relics may contain biological or quasi-biological structures that have remained active for centuries. This hypothesis would explain why the artifacts react to the presence of living people. They respond to the life energy emitted by the human body. In the 1950s, American psychiatrist Wilhelm Reich developed a theory of orgone energy, a universal life force that permeates the entire universe and accumulates in organic materials. Reich claimed to have created devices capable of collecting and concentrating this energy, using alternating layers of organic and metallic substances. His work was declared pseudoscience, and the scientist himself was persecuted. But the idea of the existence of subtle energies interacting with consciousness continued to attract the attention of researchers of anomalous phenomena. As applied to Vatican relics, the orgone theory suggests that ancient artifacts may have been specially crafted or treated to serve as accumulators of spiritual energy. Prayers, meditations, and religious rituals over the centuries charged these objects, turning them into a kind of battery, capable of radiating the accumulated energy back into the surrounding space. Quantum physics has offered even more intriguing explanations for the phenomenon. In the 1970s, physicist Fritjof Capra, in his book The Tao of Physics, drew parallels between modern quantum theories and ancient Eastern spiritual teachings. He pointed out that at the quantum level, matter exhibits properties that contradict everyday logic. Particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously, influence each other instantaneously at any distance, and the observer's consciousness influences the results of experiments. If we apply these principles to Vatican relics, we can assume that the artifacts exist in a state of quantum superposition, where their physical properties are not defined until they interact with the observer's consciousness. A person's prayer or meditation creates quantum decoherence, causing the relic to manifest certain properties: color, luminescence, shape. This theory explains why artifacts behave differently with different people, and why scientific instruments malfunction when attempts are made to measure them. Esoteric traditions offer their own explanation based on the concept of information fields, or the Akashic records, a hypothetical repository of all information about the past, present, and future of the universe. According to this view, Vatican relics serve as interfaces for accessing this universal information field. People with developed spiritual sensitivity can read information through artifacts, which manifests itself in the form of visual effects. Color changes symbolize different types of information, and glow indicates the activity of the transmission process. Contemporary consciousness researchers, such as Rupert Sheldrake with his theory of morphogenetic fields, provide a scientific basis for such ideas. Sheldrake argues that information can be transmitted through space and time by means of non-local fields that do not require material carriers. The relics could be artificially created resonators of such fields, tuned to specific frequencies of spiritual reality. The most radical theory suggests that the Vatican artifacts are technological devices created by a highly advanced civilization of the past, or even extraterrestrial intelligence. This hypothesis is based on a principle formulated by Arthur C. Clarke. Sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. If ancient civilizations possessed knowledge of the nature of reality far superior to our own, they could have created devices that operate on principles we have not yet discovered. The artifacts may use quantum entanglement, space-time manipulation, interaction with parallel dimensions, or other exotic physical phenomena. The Church, having acquired these objects at various periods in history, does not understand their true nature, but intuitively realizes their enormous power and potential danger. That is why access to the relics is so strictly limited, and any attempts at scientific study are suppressed. The Vatican fears that revealing the technological nature of the artifacts will destroy the religious worldview and deprive the Church of its monopoly on explaining miracles and contact with higher powers. The connection between Vatican relics and ancient civilizations and forgotten cults can be traced through historical documents and archaeological evidence, carefully concealed by official historiography. Some of the artifacts stored in secret vaults date back thousands of years before the Christian era. One such object, according to leaked information, is a stone tablet with inscriptions in an unknown language, found by the Crusaders in the ruins of an ancient temple near Jerusalem in the 12th century. Linguists who have seen copies of the inscriptions have been unable to identify the language, noting only a distant resemblance to Proto-Sumerian script and symbols found in Mohenjo-Daro. The tablet demonstrates an unusual property. Under certain lighting conditions, additional symbols appear on its surface that are invisible under normal conditions, as if the text exists in several layers of reality at the same time. Another artifact, a metal disc with a diameter of about 30 centimeters, was brought to Europe from Egypt in the 16th century. According to descriptions preserved in the archives, the disc is covered with spiral patterns and hieroglyphs that do not correspond to any known period of Egyptian history. Moreover, the metal from which the artifact is made cannot be identified. It is not subject to corrosion, is unusually light for its size, and has the property of reflecting light at impossible angles, violating the laws of optics. Researchers of ancient civilizations believe that such objects may be the legacy of antediluvian cultures mentioned in the mythology of various peoples. Plato wrote about Atlantis as a highly developed civilization that possessed technologies unavailable to its contemporaries. If the legends have a basis in reality, then the Vatican relics may be the last surviving examples of Atlantean science and magic, representing a synthesis of technology and spiritual practice. Some artifacts are associated with ancient solar cults that worship the sun as a source of life and divine power. A golden staff kept in one of the Vatican's vaults is decorated with symbols identical to those found in Inca temples, although official history claims that contact between the Old and New worlds was impossible before Columbus. Even more mysterious is the fact that similar symbols have been found on megalithic structures in India and stone circles in Britain, built at about the same time. This suggests the existence of a global civilization or cultural community in prehistoric times that possessed a unified system of religious and scientific knowledge. The staff demonstrates the ability to generate a faint glow at dawn and dusk, as if resonating with the position of the sun, which may indicate its use in astronomical observations or rituals related to the solar cycle. Of particular interest are artifacts associated with Gnostic sects and early Christian heretical movements. Gnostics believed in the existence of secret knowledge accessible only to the initiated and used various magical objects in their rituals. After the destruction of Gnostic communities in the early centuries of Christianity, many of their sacred objects were confiscated by the Church and placed in storage, where they remain to this day. Among them, the so-called Cup of Knowledge, made of a dark stone of unknown origin, stands out. According to Gnostic texts found in Nag Hammadi, such cups were used for rituals aimed at awakening the inner divine principle in a person. The cup changes temperature without external heating or cooling, becoming hot or cold when touched by different people, as if assessing the spiritual status of the person touching it. The most controversial theories link some Vatican relics to pre-Christian cults of the Middle East that practiced complex magical rituals. Babylonian priests, Egyptian magicians, and Persian Zoroastrians possessed knowledge of matter and energy that was partially lost after the fall of their civilizations. The Church, having established its dominance in the Mediterranean, systematically destroyed traces of pagan beliefs, but preserved the most valuable artifacts, perhaps understanding their power. There is documentary evidence that during the Crusades, the Knights Templar actively searched for ancient relics in the Holy Land, using maps and texts whose origins remain a mystery. After the defeat of the Knights Templar in the early 14th century, some of the artifacts they found fell into the hands of the Vatican. It is possible that these objects demonstrate the most pronounced anomalous properties, being the fruit of the knowledge of civilizations whose history was deliberately erased by the victors. What secrets could be revealed to humanity if access to these artifacts became free? And is their concealment not the greatest crime against the progress of knowledge? The Vatican's secret archives are one of the most closely guarded information resources in the world, containing documents accumulated over 2 millennia of the Catholic Church's existence. Officially, the archives hold about 85 kilometers of shelves with manuscripts, bulls, letters, and reports. But there is a widespread belief that there are additional, absolutely secret repositories, accessible only to a few of the highest church hierarchs. According to leaks, it is in these forbidden rooms that documents describing the history and properties of changing relics are kept. One of the archivists who worked in the Vatican in the 1980s spoke of the existence of a catalog codenamed Index Miraculum, containing a systematic description of all anomalous artifacts under the control of the Church. Access to this catalog allegedly requires the personal permission of the Pope. The most intriguing documents date back to the Middle Ages, when the Church was actively fighting heresy and magical practices throughout Europe. The Inquisitors not only burned heretics, but also confiscated any items related to the occult, alchemy, and pagan cults. Many of these artifacts were destroyed, but the most unusual specimens were preserved for study and kept in special vaults under strict supervision. The Chronicles of the Inquisition, partially declassified in the 20th century, contain references to living stones, shape-shifting metals, and glowing crystals seized from alchemists and sorcerers. However, detailed descriptions of these objects remain classified, and the pages containing the most important information have been cut out of public copies of the documents. Historians believe that these confiscated artifacts make up a significant part of the Vatican's modern collection of anomalous relics. In the 16th century, Pope Paul III created a special commission called the Congregation of Secret Affairs, whose task was to investigate and document all cases of miracles, anomalous phenomena, and inexplicable events in the Catholic world. The commission worked in strict secrecy. Its members took a vow of silence under penalty of death, and all collected materials were classified according to their degree of danger to the faith and public order. Documents of the highest level of secrecy, marked with a seal depicting a key and a cross, could not be read by anyone except the Pope and a few cardinals from his inner circle. The congregation continued to exist until the 19th century, after which it was officially dissolved. But researchers believe that it merely went underground and continues to operate under a different name. All materials collected over 3 centuries of activity are stored in a separate, restricted section of the archives, to which even high-ranking church historians are not allowed access. Of particular interest are documents describing attempts to use relics for political purposes. In the 17th century, during the 30 Years' War, there were rumors that Pope Urban VIII ordered secret rituals using one of the luminous artifacts in an attempt to influence the outcome of the war. According to unconfirmed sources, the ceremony was held in an underground chapel where several cardinals prayed before the relic, which emitted an intense red glow. The purpose of the ritual is unknown, but some historians link it to the sudden death of King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden at the Battle of Lutzen, which radically changed the balance of power in the war. Documents confirming or refuting this theory remain classified, but the very existence of such rumors indicates the belief of the highest church hierarchs in the possibility of using the power of artifacts to achieve worldly goals. The most explosive documents concern the origin and true nature of the relics. According to former archive employees, there are papyri in Greek and Coptic describing the artifacts as gifts from the gods, or fragments of the heavenly city. These texts, dating from the early centuries of Christianity, contain instructions for activating and using relics, written in the form of encrypted prayers and ritual formulas. One such instruction allegedly describes a method for opening the gates between worlds, using a specific combination of artifacts arranged in a special geometric order. If this information is true, then the relics are not just sacred objects, but elements of a complex system, possibly a technology whose purpose goes beyond religious worship. The Vatican vehemently denies the existence of such documents, but the amount of independent evidence continues to grow, raising the question: what else is hidden behind the thick walls of secret archives? And is the entire history of Christianity merely the top layer of a much more ancient and mysterious tradition? Parallels with artifacts from other religions can be found in a comparative analysis of sacred objects from various spiritual traditions around the world. Buddhist monasteries in Tibet house relics called ringsa, which are crystalline formations that appear after the cremation of high lamas. These objects demonstrate the property of spontaneously multiplying, increasing in number for no apparent reason, which defies scientific explanation. Monks claim that ring seals radiate beneficial energy and change color depending on the spiritual state of the people nearby, which is strikingly reminiscent of the behavior of Vatican relics. In 1997, a group of Western researchers received permission to study several ring seals at the Kopan Monastery in Nepal. They recorded that the number of crystals did indeed increase during the observation period, and that the process took place at room temperature, without the addition of any substances. In the Hindu tradition, there are Shivalingams, sacred stones representing the deity Shiva. Some of the ancient Shivalingams kept in temples in South India demonstrate the unusual property of changing temperatures cyclically throughout the day without external heating or cooling. Temple officials measure the temperature of the stone at different times of the day and record fluctuations of up to 20 degrees Celsius that do not correlate with the ambient temperature. Moreover, pilgrims report cases of spontaneous moisture appearing on the surface of the stone, which believers consider sacred and collect for ritual purposes. Geologists who studied samples of similar stones found no porous structures or internal cavities that could explain the release of liquid. These phenomena resemble the behavior of Vatican artifacts that change their physical properties for no apparent reason. Islamic tradition knows about the black stone of the Kaaba in Mecca, a meteorite that became a sacred object of worship long before the emergence of Islam. Pilgrims performing the Hajj strive to touch the stone, and many report unusual sensations upon contact. from warmth and tingling to states of altered consciousness. Historical sources mention that the stone was originally white or transparent, but gradually turned black, absorbing the sins of the people who touched it. Although this explanation is religiously metaphorical, it points to a belief in the object's ability to interact with human consciousness and change under its influence. Interestingly, attempts to scientifically study the stone meet with the same resistance from religious authorities as in the case of Vatican relics, suggesting a universal reluctance to reveal the true nature of sacred artifacts. Jewish tradition contains references to the Ark of the Covenant, which held the tablets of the Ten Commandments. According to biblical texts, the Ark had the ability to emit deadly energy that killed those who touched it without proper preparation. Modern researchers suggest that the Ark may have been a kind of capacitor that accumulated electrical charge thanks to its construction of gold and acacia wood. This theory is supported by descriptions of sparks and thunder accompanying the presence of the Ark. After the destruction of the First Temple in 586 BC, the Ark disappeared, and there are numerous legends about its whereabouts. Some conspiracy theorists believe that the Ark is secretly kept in the Vatican, representing one of the most powerful artifacts in the Church's collection. Shamanic cultures in Siberia and America use sacred objects such as tambourines, wands, and amulets, which, according to practitioners, possess their own consciousness and power. Shamans describe the process of activating these objects through rituals and prolonged interaction, after which the artifacts begin to vibrate, make sounds, or emit heat without physical contact. Anthropologists who have studied shamanic practices note striking similarities in the descriptions of the behavior of sacred objects among peoples who have never had contact with each other. This universal phenomenon points to the possibility of common principles of interaction between consciousness and matter, realized through specially prepared artifacts. Perhaps different religious traditions independently discovered the same phenomenon, interpreting it through the prism of their cultural and spiritual systems. And Vatican relics are just the Christian version of a universal phenomenon that permeates the entire history of humanity. Contemporary conspiracy theories link Vatican relics to global power structures and secret societies that control world events from the shadows. According to one popular version, the highest church hierarchs use the power of artifacts to manipulate the consciousness of the masses, create social movements, and even provoke wars and revolutions. This theory is based on historical facts of the Vatican's active intervention in the politics of European states over the centuries. Critics point to coincidences between important church ceremonies involving relics and subsequent major historical events. For example, a week before the start of World War I in 1914, Pope Pius X held a closed ceremony, which is only mentioned in fragments in the diaries of his contemporaries. Is this a coincidence, or evidence of the use of artifacts to influence the collective consciousness of humanity? Conspiracy theorists pay particular attention to the links between the Vatican and Masonic lodges. Despite the Catholic Church's official hostility towards Freemasonry, there is documentary evidence of secret contacts and even cooperation at the highest levels. The Propaganda Due scandal in the 1980s revealed the existence of a secret Masonic lodge within the Vatican, whose members included influential cardinals and bankers. It is possible that one of the goals of this alliance was to control anomalous artifacts and use their power to achieve the common goals of the global elite. Some researchers claim that Masonic symbols, such as the all-seeing eye and the pyramid, are actually associated with ancient relics that depict or embody these archetypal images. Another theory links Vatican artifacts to secret service programs for the study of paranormal phenomena. It is known that during the Cold War, both the KGB and the CIA actively researched the possibilities of applying extrasensory perception, telepathy, and psychokinesis for military purposes. The CIA's Stargate project, declassified in the 1990s, confirms the seriousness of these programs. There are unconfirmed rumors that American intelligence agencies have repeatedly attempted to infiltrate the Vatican's secret vaults to study or steal relics. In 1974, a strange incident occurred when modern electronic equipment of unknown origin was discovered in one of the underground rooms. The official investigation did not identify the culprits, but security was immediately tightened. Conspiracy theorists also point to a possible connection between the relics and the UFO phenomenon. In recent decades, there have been increasing reports of unidentified flying objects over the Vatican, especially at night. Some witnesses described pulsating lights hovering over certain buildings in the complex, which presumably correspond to the location of secret storage facilities. There is a theory that the relics are devices of extraterrestrial origin or beacons transmitting signals into space. In recent years, the Catholic Church has changed its official position on the existence of extraterrestrial life, allowing for the possibility of its existence within the framework of divine creation. Could this be a way of preparing public opinion for the future disclosure of information about the extraterrestrial nature of certain artifacts? The most radical theories claim that the Vatican is part of a global control system that uses a network of anomalous artifacts distributed across sacred sites around the world. These objects allegedly form a planetary grid that generates an energy field that influences the consciousness of all humanity. The purpose of the system varies from suppressing people's spiritual development to preparing the planet for some grand event known only to a small circle of initiates. Proponents of this version point to the geometric arrangement of major religious centers: the Vatican, Jerusalem, Mecca, Lhasa, and others form regular geometric shapes on the world map. Is this a coincidence, or evidence of an ancient plan that has been implemented over thousands of years? And if the truth turns out to be even stranger than the wildest theories, is humanity ready to accept it? The role of relics in world politics and power can be traced through the history of the Vatican's influence on key historical events of recent centuries. It is documented that the papal throne has always sought to play the role of arbiter in conflicts between states, using spiritual authority and diplomatic channels. However, some researchers believe that the true source of this influence was not only moral authority and political skill, but also the possession of artifacts that gave access to information about future events or the ability to influence the minds of political leaders. During World War II, Pope Pius XII held numerous closed meetings and ceremonies, the content of which is still unknown. Some historians link these events to attempts to use spiritual powers to end the conflict, or, at least, to protect the Vatican itself from destruction. Particularly intriguing is the case of Pope Benedict XVI's abdication in 2013, the first voluntary departure of a pontiff in 600 years. Officially, the resignation was explained by age and poor health. But rumors circulated in Catholic circles about deeper reasons. According to one version, Benedict encountered something in the secret archives, or while working with relics that shook him to the core and forced him to renounce the papal throne. A Vatican insider, who wished to remain anonymous, claimed that a few months before his resignation, the Pope held a private ceremony in the presence of one of the most powerful artifacts. After that, his behavior changed. He became withdrawn and distant, as if he had seen something that completely overturned his worldview. According to some reports, contemporary political leaders are aware of the existence of Vatican artifacts and seek access to information about them. The tradition of private audiences with the Pope for heads of state may serve not only as diplomatic protocol, but also as an opportunity for selected politicians to gain insights or blessings through contact with relics. There is unconfirmed evidence that U.S. presidents since the Cold War era have received special briefings on paranormal artifacts, including information about the Vatican collection. This would explain the special relationship between Washington and the Holy See, which goes beyond ordinary diplomacy. In 2009, President Barack Obama held an unusually long closed-door meeting with Pope Benedict at the Vatican, the details of which were never disclosed to the press. The Vatican's financial influence may also be linked to its possession of relics. The Institute for Religious Works, informally known as the Vatican Bank, manages billions of dollars in assets and has a reputation as one of the most opaque financial institutions in the world. Some conspiracy theorists suggest that part of these funds are used to finance secret research on artifacts, create special storage facilities, and pay for the services of scientists and security specialists. The scandals that periodically rock the Vatican's finances may be just the tip of the iceberg, hiding much larger operations. In 2012, a leak of confidential documents known as Vatileaks revealed internal intrigues and financial irregularities, but did not mention a word about expenses related to secret artifacts. The geopolitical significance of relics becomes apparent when analyzing how passionately various forces have sought control over sacred objects throughout history. From the Crusades to colonial conquests, from Napoleon's looting to Nazi expeditions in search of artifacts, history is full of examples of attempts to seize sacred objects. Hitler created a special organization, the Ahnenerbe, which searched the world for ancient relics that could give the Third Reich mystical superiority. After the fall of Nazi Germany, many trophies fell into the hands of the Allies, but some may have been secretly transferred to the Vatican via the so-called rat trails, routes used by war criminals to flee. It is possible that today's collection of Vatican artifacts includes objects for which the bloodiest wars of the 20th century were fought, and their true value lies not in their religious or historical significance, but in the real power they can give to those who learn how to use them. Attempts to steal and protect artifacts represent a separate chapter in the history of Vatican relics, shrouded in mystery and contradictory evidence. Over the past 2 centuries, there have been at least 5 serious attempts to break into secret vaults with the aim of stealing or destroying artifacts. In 1827, a group of unknown individuals, presumably associated with Masonic circles, attempted to break into the underground vault beneath St. Peter's Basilica. The conspiracy was uncovered thanks to a traitor among the intruders, but the details of the operation were never made public. Those arrested refused to testify and were quietly expelled from the Papal States without trial. Historians believe that the goal was not to steal relics for sale, but to gain access to the knowledge that the artifacts could allegedly impart to the initiated. This indicates that information about the properties of the relics was disseminated outside the Vatican among secret societies. The most daring theft attempt took place in 1968, at the height of student unrest and social upheaval in Europe. A group of 7 people, including a former Swiss guard and 2 priests, devised a plan to break into the forbidden vaults. They used their knowledge of the internal layout and passwords to bypass the first levels of security. The operation failed at the last stage when the robbers encountered an unexpected obstacle. According to their own testimony, when they tried to take one of the artifacts, they experienced a powerful psychological shock, accompanied by hallucinations and paralysis. 2 of them lost consciousness, while the others fled in panic. All participants were arrested within 24 hours, but none of them could clearly explain what exactly had happened in the vault. Interestingly, several of them subsequently spent the rest of their lives in psychiatric hospitals. The Vatican's artifact protection system is a multi-level structure that combines modern security technology with traditional methods passed down from generation to generation. Physical protection includes the Swiss Guard, Italian Carabinieri, and private security services. But this is only the visible part. The most valuable relics are stored in underground safes with biometric locks, motion detectors, and climate control systems. However, there is evidence of additional security measures that defy rational explanation. A former security guard who worked in the Vatican in the 1980s spoke of rejection zones around certain artifacts, where people experience inexplicable fear, nausea, and disorientation. These sensations arise long before physical contact with the relics and do not depend on a person's awareness of their presence. There is a theory that the artifacts themselves have the ability to defend themselves, activating unknown mechanisms when unauthorized access is attempted. This would explain the numerous cases of unexplained incidents involving robbers and curious researchers. In the 1990s, a Japanese journalist who entered the restricted area during an excursion attempted to photograph one of the relics through a slightly open door. His camera immediately malfunctioned, and he lost his memory of the next 2 hours. He was found sitting on a bench in the Vatican Gardens in a state of deep prostration. After returning to Japan, he categorically refused to talk about what had happened and destroyed all materials related to the investigation. Such cases create an atmosphere of mystical fear around the artifacts, effectively complementing physical security with a psychological barrier. The international trade in antiquities and the black market for artifacts pose a constant threat to Vatican relics. Billionaire collectors and members of secret societies are willing to pay astronomical sums for authentic sacred objects with anomalous properties. There are rumors of several successful thefts that were never made public for reasons of Vatican prestige. In 2005, an advertisement appeared on the darknet offering to sell a glowing stone from the Vatican for $50 million. The ad disappeared after a day, and it is unknown whether the deal was made or whether it was a provocation. Interpol has information about the existence of a specialized criminal network involved in the theft and smuggling of religious artifacts around the world, and the Vatican is one of the main targets of this organization. The question is, how many more relics unknown to us have already ended up in private collections? And what danger does their uncontrolled use by people who do not understand the nature of these objects pose? Quantum physics and the inexplicable properties of matter open up new perspectives for understanding the phenomenon of Vatican relics through the prism of modern science. Discoveries in recent decades have radically changed our understanding of the nature of reality, showing that at a fundamental level, matter behaves completely differently than in everyday experience. The effect of quantum entanglement, in which two particles remain connected regardless of the distance between them, demonstrates the existence of forms of interaction that do not require physical contact. If we apply this concept to artifacts, we can assume that they are in a state of entanglement with the consciousness of the people interacting with them, which explains why relics respond to thoughts and emotions. Physicist Roger Penrose has proposed a theory of quantum processes in the microtubules of neurons as the basis of consciousness, which opens up the possibility of direct quantum interaction between the brain and material objects. The phenomenon of quantum tunneling, in which particles overcome energy barriers that are theoretically impassable from the point of view of classical physics, may explain the change in shape of some artifacts. If the material of a relic exists in a special quantum state, its atoms can be rearranged without the application of external force, creating the illusion of deformation or growth. Experiments with quantum computers have shown that quantum systems are capable of being in a superposition of multiple states simultaneously, and only the act of observation causes the system to choose a specific state. Perhaps ancient artifacts were created using technologies that stabilize macroscopic quantum states, giving them properties that are impossible for ordinary matter. Modern science is just beginning to experiment with quantum effects at the molecular level, but the creators of relics may have achieved this thousands of years ago. The theory of non-locality in quantum mechanics, confirmed by experiments testing Bell's inequalities, shows that information can be transmitted instantaneously over any distance. This contradicts Einstein's special theory of relativity, according to which Nothing can move faster than light, but experiments convincingly prove the reality of non-local correlations. The synchronous glow of several Vatican relics in different repositories, as reported earlier, fits perfectly into the concept of quantum non-locality. The artifacts may be quantum entangled with each other, forming a single system that responds coherently to certain stimuli. This suggests that the creators of the relics possessed knowledge of quantum mechanics long before its official discovery in the 20th century, which calls into question the linear model of scientific and technological progress. The concept of dark matter and dark energy, which make up 95% of the universe, opens up even more fantastic possibilities. Scientists admit that they do not understand the nature of these substances, known only for their gravitational effect on visible matter. Some theoretical physicists suggest the existence of parallel dimensions, or hidden sectors of reality that interact with our world through gravity, and possibly through other as yet unknown forces. Vatican artifacts may serve as interfaces for interacting with these hidden dimensions, drawing energy or information from sources inaccessible to ordinary perception. The glow of the relics could be a side effect of energy leaking from parallel realities into our world through the structure of the artifact. String theory, which attempts to unify quantum mechanics and gravity, predicts the existence of additional spatial dimensions, collapsed to microscopic sizes. If the artifacts were created by a civilization that learned to manipulate these dimensions, they could possess properties that seem magical from the perspective of a three-dimensional being. The color change could reflect the rotation of part of the object through additional dimensions, and the glow could reflect the leakage of energy from these dimensions into our space. Modern physics is on the verge of revolutionary discoveries that could radically change our understanding of the nature of reality, and Vatican relics may be the key to accelerating this process. But is humanity ready for knowledge that could completely overturn the scientific picture of the world and call into question fundamental ideas about matter, space, time, and consciousness? Predictions and prophecies associated with relics constitute a special category of esoteric texts, carefully guarded by the Vatican. According to leaks, there are medieval manuscripts describing future events that will occur when certain artifacts manifest special properties or are used in specific rituals. One such prophecy, attributed to the medieval mystic Joachim of Fiore, mentions a sign of the living stone that will herald the dawn of a new spiritual age for humanity. Interpreters believe that this refers to one of the Vatican relics, which is supposed to manifest itself at a certain historical moment. Some link this prophecy to the events of the 21st century, pointing to the frequent cases of anomalous activity of artifacts in recent decades. Are these coincidences accidental? Or are we living in the era predicted by ancient seers? Malachi's prophecies about the Roman popes, compiled in the 12th century, contain mysterious mottos for each pontiff until the end of time. The last pope on the list is described as Peter the Roman, during whose reign the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and humanity will face a terrible judgment. Conspiracy theorists point out that the current Pope Francis may be the penultimate or last on this list, depending on the interpretation. Interestingly, Francis has shown an unusual interest in secret archives, and according to some reports, held several closed ceremonies involving ancient artifacts shortly after his election. Does the pontiff know something about upcoming events related to relics that is causing him to act with such urgency? In 2019, the Pope made a cryptic statement that the time is coming, without specifying what time he was referring to. The Fatima prophecies, given to 3 Portuguese children in 1917, include 3 secrets, the last of which was only officially revealed by the Vatican in 2001. However, many researchers believe that the published version is incomplete or distorted, and that the real third secret contains information so shocking that the Church does not dare to make it public. Some witnesses claim that the third secret is related to the future disclosure of the mystery of Vatican artifacts and their role in upcoming global events. Sister Lucia, the last of the three visionaries to live until 2005, allegedly left additional notes that are still kept in secret archives. Why does the Vatican continue to hide the full version of the prophecy more than a century after the first apparition? Apocalyptic predictions from various cultures and religions contain strikingly similar descriptions of signs of the end times, including references to sacred objects that will manifest unprecedented power before the end of the era. The Book of Revelation describes 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls that will be opened or poured out during apocalyptic events. Esotericists believe that these symbols may refer not only to spiritual realities, but also to specific physical objects stored in various sacred places around the world. Vatican relics may be part of this system, and their activation in a specific sequence could trigger a chain of events on a cosmic scale. Medieval illuminated manuscripts contain images of luminous objects surrounded by angels and demons, which some interpret as a symbolic representation of the struggle for control over powerful artifacts. Contemporary clairvoyants and psychics who claim to be in contact with higher powers have repeatedly mentioned artifacts stored in the Vatican in their visions. The Bulgarian clairvoyant Vanga, who had a reputation for accurate predictions, allegedly spoke of sacred stones that will speak when humanity is on the brink of disaster. Mexican shaman and anthropologist Carlos Castaneda mentioned in his works objects of power, capable of opening gates to other realities, and described their properties, which are strikingly similar to the characteristics of Vatican relics. Edgar Cayce, a 20th-century American mystic, spoke in a trance about ancient temples where crystals containing the recorded history of lost civilizations are stored, which will be found and deciphered at a critical moment in human development. All these independent sources agree on one thing: the artifacts play a key role in the future of humanity, and the time of their disclosure is inexorably approaching, regardless of the wishes of those who are trying to keep the secret. What the Vatican is hiding, and why science is silent, are questions to which there are no clear answers. But reasonable assumptions can be made based on the facts gathered. For 2 millennia, the Catholic Church has positioned itself as the guardian of spiritual truth and the mediator between humanity and the divine. Recognizing the existence of artifacts with anomalous properties that do not fit into religious doctrine would jeopardize this position. If the relics represent the technology of an ancient civilization, or even extraterrestrial origin, it would mean that miracles have a rational explanation that does not require belief in the supernatural. Such a revelation could cause a crisis of faith among millions of Catholics and undermine the authority of the Church as a spiritual institution. That is why the Vatican prefers silence, maintaining ambiguity and allowing believers to interpret phenomena within the framework of religious tradition. The scientific community, on the other hand, faces its own barriers when studying such phenomena. Academic science is based on the reproducibility of experiments and the objectivity of observations. But artifacts that respond to the observer's consciousness violate these principles. A scientist who claims to work with objects that demonstrate paranormal properties risks their reputation and career, becoming a target for accusations of pseudoscience. The system of scientific funding and publications creates a powerful filter that cuts off research that does not fit into the dominant paradigm. Even if individual scientists gain access to Vatican relics and observe anomalies, it is virtually impossible to publish the results without the possibility of independent verification. This creates a vicious circle. Artifacts remain inaccessible for study, and the lack of publications is used as proof of their non-existence. There is also a hypothesis of a conscious conspiracy between religious and scientific elites to conceal information. According to this version, The upper echelons of both communities are aware of the reality of the phenomenon, but understand that revealing the truth will have unpredictable social consequences. Mass awareness of the existence of technologies or forces beyond modern understanding could lead to panic, the collapse of economic systems, and the breakdown of social order. History knows examples of how sudden shifts in worldview have caused wars and revolutions. Controlled ignorance of the majority can be seen as a lesser evil compared to the chaos of full disclosure. Meetings between Vatican representatives and the world's leading scientists take place regularly, but their agenda is never fully disclosed. Geopolitical considerations also play a role in concealing information. Possession of artifacts with inexplicable properties gives the Vatican a unique position on the world stage. It is a source of influence that cannot be bought or conquered by force. If information about the relics became public, a race would begin between states for control of them, possibly leading to a new type of conflict, a war for ancient technology. Without military power, the Vatican would lose control of the artifacts, which would end up in the hands of military powers. This explains why even secular governments may have an interest in maintaining secrecy. It is better to leave the relics under the control of a neutral religious organization than to allow an enemy to gain access to them. The psychological factor of fear of the unknown should not be underestimated. The human psyche does not cope well with phenomena that radically contradict everyday experience. Studies show that people tend to deny or rationalize what does not fit into their worldview, even when faced with direct evidence. Scientists who encounter anomalous artifacts may subconsciously avoid further study in order to protect their own psychological balance. Church ministers, raised in the tradition of faith, may experience cognitive dissonance between their religious beliefs and the physical reality of the artifacts. It is easier to accept the existing order of things and not ask uncomfortable questions than to face a truth that could destroy the foundation of one's identity. Perhaps the simplest explanation is that no one knows the whole truth. The Vatican keeps artifacts that have been passed down through the centuries, but understanding of their nature and purpose may have been lost in the process of transmission. Modern custodians have instructions for handling the relics, but do not know the principles behind them. Science has made impressive strides, but is still in the early stages of understanding the fundamental nature of reality. Quantum mechanics, dark matter, consciousness. These are all areas where there are still more questions than answers. Perhaps in a century or a millennium, humanity will reach a level of development that allows it to fully understand and reproduce the properties of artifacts. For now, we live in an era of transitional ignorance, balancing between ancient mysteries and future discoveries, between faith and knowledge, between fear and hope that the truth, however shocking it may be, will ultimately free humanity from the shackles of ignorance and open the way to a new stage in the evolution of consciousness and civilization.